What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fans? This your boy, JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast network and channel. Giving a shout out to the rest of the crew. And for everyone who's tuning in, I hope that you support Behind the Bench, become a subscriber, and help make this show the best that it can be. And with your support since we've started this channel, we have now reached over 86,000 views. And we're trying to achieve 100,000 views by year's end, going into year 2024. And with your continued support and willingness to tune in and listen to our content, we can achieve that goal. You make the show go and you make the show happen. I just want to throw that out there. Big time appreciation for everyone. Now, you know, when you are an avid sports lover, such as myself, and when you follow the NBA, me personally, I've been watching the NBA since the merger. When the ABA disbanded in 1976 and merged with the NBA, that's when I started watching. And 1976 marked the nation's bicentennial anniversary, the nation's 250th birthday. And it was a big thing in 1976. And as a kid, just looking back on it, it was actually a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And a lot of great things started to happen in the sports world. ESPN came into existence, or I should say ESPN was born in 1979. And it became the leader in sports television. Probably within 5 years, to tell you the truth, by the late 80s, it became known as the leader in sports television. And you had so much joy tuning in, watching, and listening to the standard bearers, man, the forebearers, you know what I'm saying, the luminaries of sports television and sports talk. Man, it was a privilege tuning in, listening to these guys. And there was a lot of great female commentators, man, reporters, you know, that broke ground for what we see today. And it was the highs of the highs. And it was awesome, man. And when you witness something that was once so good become so bad, man, you know, it's almost like an insult to you, man. And now they're going to tell you what you saw 30 years ago isn't what you saw. But the reality is what they're trying to convince people to see isn't even close to being real. See, they have flipped the script. They have took reality in and of itself and tried to create virtual reality within that realm. And it's the most insane thing I've ever seen, man. And it's an insult. You know, I don't know Michael Jordan personally. I've never seen him play in person. I had the opportunity to anticipate him playing in person for the first time during the start of the 93-94 season. And that's when he announced his first retirement. So I've never got a chance to see Michael Jordan play. And what they're doing to this man, they're building their career off of trashing this man's legacy. But if the script was flipped and turned upside down and we start critiquing him and calling him out, they wouldn't like it. But see, the people who used to cover sports back then, I'm not saying they were perfect. You had people out there making predictions left and right. They got the predictions wrong, but it was fun in nature. Like what Charles Barkley tends to do, he make a prediction, it goes wrong, and we tease him and, you know, we give him a hard time, but it's all in fun. It's all in jest. No big deal. But this right here, man, me personally, I think it's criminal what they're doing to this athlete, man. This man retired 20 years ago. And quite to the contrary, the way he's being portrayed today, when ESPN conducted their Sports Century series back in 1999 to, do a countdown of the 100 greatest athletes of the 20th century, guess who was ranked number 1? Number 3 was Muhammad Ali. Now, if he'd have been selected as number 1 athlete, I wouldn't have had no problem. I love Ali. Babe Ruth was voted number 2. I have no problem with Babe Ruth. I know there's a lot of controversy around him, but at the end of the day, He's one of your central figures in baseball history. No matter what time he played in, he did what he did. He achieved what he achieved. But the number one athlete that was voted for was Michael Jordan. And you get a guy like this guy right here and Nick Wright, who was misleading millions. He'll come out of a bag and say something like, well, they act like Jordan never lost. He got beat by Orlando in 95. We all know he got beat in 1995. But what he won't tell you is this was during his comeback, 17 games left into that year's season, when the Chicago Bulls were 34-31, and he led them to a, I think, 13-4 finish at the end of the season. Scottie Pippen, who was leading the team for the previous a year and a half, he returned back to his number 2 role, and he gladly, naturally relinquished the number 1 role back to his natural leader in Michael Jordan. What Nick Wright won't tell you is that Michael Jordan, even though he was not himself, that he had trouble finishing game because he was not in NBA condition, he still led all scores in points per game average during that series. He led Shaquille O'Neal and he led Penny Hardaway, everybody in this series. But what he won't tell you is when he came back that next year, determined, led the Bulls to a 72-10 record, right? 72-10 record. And that loss to Orlando was an afterthought. He proved that was no more than a fluke. That sweep of Orlando in 96, because Orlando in 95, when they beat the Bulls, they beat them in 6 games in the second round. Most of those games were close. It wasn't like Orlando was blowing out the Chicago Bulls, and vice versa. But man, when Michael Jordan came back that next year, and also what Nick Wright won't tell you is the Bulls lacked interior rebounding and defense. Because when they try to convince these young fans that the Chicago Bulls were a super team with Tony Kukoc, but what he won't tell you is Tony Kukoc was not a good defender, nor was he a good rebounder. See, Kukoc, when he eventually was brought to the Bulls, because he was drafted in 1990, before the Bulls won their first championship. When Kukoc was playing in Croatia, he had to wait 3 years before he was eligible to make his debut in the NBA, right? So Kukoc was, they was hoping that Kukoc would be Scottie Pippen, because we didn't know as the basketball public if Michael Jordan was ever going to return back to the NBA, because for all practical purposes, he was retired. Plus, he went to go play another sport. You see what I'm saying? That's what the Nick Wrights of the world won't tell you. You know what I'm saying? But the people who know, who grew up during that time, we're the ones who know how it went down. And Michael Jordan took his attempt in baseball seriously. Whereas if baseball had not shut down the season after the players went on strike, because they was trying to get replacement players or minor league players to fill in for the major league players, Michael Jordan wouldn't do that in respect to the sport. So when baseball went on strike and then ultimately baseball was shut down for the rest of that season, that opened the door for Michael Jordan to return back to the NBA. But outside of that, according to his manager in AAA, Terry Francona, who went on to manage the Boston Red Sox and lead them to multiple World Series championships, Terry Francona said Michael Jordan would achieve his dream of playing Major League Baseball. That's how much and that's how fast he improved for an athlete who had not played that sport since his high school years. That's what the Nick Wrights of the world won't tell you. Michael Jordan would have played baseball if it wasn't for that strike. But nonetheless, as they say, the basketball gods, they directed him back to the NBA. And he admitted himself, he was in baseball condition, but he wasn't in basketball condition. But all all in all, he still came back and dominated. But he couldn't finish games because of fatigue, not being in condition, and he didn't have his legs to finish off games. Therefore, his jumper was short. It wasn't like he was looking like a shell of himself. It was just he wasn't in basketball shape. But he came back that next year. And then they did acquire Dennis Rodman to shore up the rebounding and the defense in the interior. Kukoc was relegated to be the sixth man. You see? But as I said before, they was looking for him to be Scottie Pippen and Scottie Pippen. Okay. So therefore, when you break it down, that Bulls team that three-peated from 96 to 98, that wasn't no super team. That wasn't no super team because outside of Jordan, Pippen averaged 20 points a game one time during that second three-peat. And that was during the 96-97 season. See, they're not going to tell you that. But anyway, they avenged their loss to Orlando to such a degree, they swept them in brutal fashion. First game, now this is prime Orlando that had a better regular season record than the previous year when they went to the finals. In 95, they finished with 59 wins. And 96, they finished with 60 wins, and they had the best starting five in the NBA. Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, and Horace Grant, right? And the Bulls ran right through them. Game one, they beat them about 40. Game two, they came back from 19 down. Pip and Jordan applied that full court trap in the second half of game two, shut Orlando down. And you knew the series was over after the first game. And then Orlando packed it in after game two. Game three was a formality, and then Jordan finished it off with a 45-point masterpiece to sweep that series in such emphatic fashion. People forget and forgot that Orlando beat them the previous year, which shows that was a fluke. And it resonated to such a degree where Shaquille O'Neal went west that offseason. He went west, and Orlando was never the same. That's what the Nick Wrights of the world won't tell you. You see what I'm saying? But they like to take this man's history and trash it to the core to uplift an individual, and we all know who I'm talking about. And it's an insult. It's an insult. They're doing a disservice to their own craft. They're doing a disservice to the people who laid the foundation and made it possible for him to do what he do, even though he's taking his opportunity and running to the ground, trying to trash this man's history and past NBA history to prop one individual, man. And you can't do that. You can't do that because the basketball fans who grew up then, not saying that we're better than anybody else, because when it's not about the agenda or narratives, I like listening to young basketball fans because they can pick up on the game just like we did when we came up. But the environment has to be conducive for them to be able to do that and given that opportunity. And right now they're not in the manner that they should. I think this dude is poisonous. And when you got a platform like he got on air every day and he's spewing that nonsense about, this is a man, I want everybody to think about this. This is a man who the Detroit Pistons had to come up with a scheme that entailed that the entire roster from 1 to 10, because the Pistons went 10 deep. They weren't a super team, but they was built to such a degree where they went 10 deep. They had to design a defense where the whole roster was geared and focused on stopping one man. And we've never seen that before in the history of professional basketball before or since. That's what they had to do to defeat that man. And that was early as 1989 when Detroit was at their prime seeking their first championship. And Michael Jordan led the Bulls to a 2-1 series lead in that 89 Eastern Conference Finals. And as I said, Isaiah Thomas said during his that Bad Boys documentary, the E30 for 30, he said he had it go. He was so distraught and was so, how can I say this? He knew everything was on the line. That Michael Jordan, for all practical purposes, was about to beat the 63-19 Detroit Pistons by himself. So he said at Lake Michigan at the Lakeshore, he said him and Joe Dumars spoke all night long to come up with a scheme, as he said, to shut down 23 and Red. And then he called his assistant coach, Brendan Malone, and said, we finally found a way to stop Michael Jordan. Thus, the Jordan rules were born. They had to come up with that to stop Jordan. For our practical purposes, we're talking about a man who really could have won 8 or 9 championships. That's what we're talking about. The Jordan rules delayed him for 2 years, and they finally broke through once Scottie Pippen emerged as a consistent, viable number 2 option. And once everybody fulfilled their role for the Bulls, that was it. That rivalry was done. But Nick Wright, he won't put things in context. Wait a minute. He's not the only one. This guy right here, he's just as bad, if not worse, because he was a professional athlete, and he's one of the greatest players ever at his position. No doubt about it. And he won. He won 3 Super Bowls. He won 2 Super Bowls with the Denver Broncos, led by John Elway. And he won a 3rd Super Bowl with the Baltimore Ravens, with Ray Lewis being the team's best player, and Ray Lewis winning Defensive Player of the Year in 2000. But he's just as worse, because he don't put things in proper context, and he's being poisonous to his audience. I hate to say that, because many people love Shannon Sharpe, man. We respected Shannon Sharpe coming up during his football playing days. He's a very energetic personality. He has a lot of wit. He can be funny. But when you're disparaging an athlete and you trashing someone every day on TV, that ain't cool, no matter who you are or what you achieved yourself individually. And it's sad, but it's a turnoff. And when something has to be spoken of, it has to be spoken of. Now, what Shannon Sharpe will do is he'll say, Michael Jordan, he didn't beat the 86 Celtics. But guess what? Not only were the Boston Celtics the best team in the league that year, they're one of the top three greatest teams of all time in NBA history. 67-15. They went 15-3 in the postseason. They lost 1 basketball game at home, and that was in double overtime by 2 points to the Portland Trailblazers. So that means if they were that good, if they were that historic, nobody was going to beat them. And you know why? Because he'll say Michael Jordan couldn't beat the Boston Celtics. He wasn't good enough. No. Well, if that's the case, then the second round opponent, the Atlanta Hawks, weren't good enough. They had Dominique Wilkins. Dominique Wilkins led the league in scoring in 1986, averaging 30.3 points a game. And then the Milwaukee Bucks, they couldn't have been good enough either, because the Celtics did them in too. And beat them in 5 games. And then guess what? Their finals opponent, the Houston Rockets, they had the Twin Towers. Ralph Sampson, Akeem Olajuwon, Robert Reed was their guard. Allen Neville. They had a squad who beat Showtime in the 86 Western Conference Finals in 5 games. Showtime Lakers that year was the defending champion going into the postseason. So it wasn't just the Bulls who succumbed to the Celtics. Everybody succumbed to the Celtics. You see how easy that is when you insert logic into the conversation? That's what they lack in their argument against Michael Jordan while trying to prop. We know who they're trying to prop. I don't need to mention his name. But what they won't tell you is that Michael Jordan was so competitive and so fierce that he never, ever lost a playoff series when his team was favored to win. Never. All the great superstars of this sport, and there's been plenty of them. I'm talking about all of them, man. First of all, we've seen superstars playing multiple finals who suffered defeat. We've seen multiple superstars whose team was favored going to a playoff series and they were upset. This man right here never lost a playoff series where his team was favored to win. Not only that, in 1989, he upset the Cleveland Cavaliers. What the Nick Wrights and the Shannon Sharps won't tell you is that the Cleveland Cavaliers were predicted by none other than Magic Johnson to become the team of the 90s. Their team was built in a similar fashion as the Boston Celtics. Strong front court, tall front court, Brad Daugherty, Hot Rod Williams, Larry Nance Jr., awesome guard play. Like their front court was like Bird McHale Parrish. Then you had Mark Price, who was one of the top 3 point guards in the league in his prime. I'm talking about pure point guard. He was like to Cleveland what Dennis Johnson was to Boston. And then you had Ron Harper, who was their 2 guard, who can get you 20 plus a game. And he was to Cleveland what Danny Ainge was to Boston. They was built in the mold of Boston. And Michael Jordan shut them down and beat them as early as 1989. Their dynasty never took place because of Michael Jordan. See, not only did he beat teams that were favored to beat his team, he upset teams that potentially could have produced dynasties. And then in the second round, he beat the New York Knicks, who won the Atlantic Division, who was favored to beat the Bulls to advance to the conference finals. And Jordan beat them in 6 games, while Scottie Pippen, the number 2 option, although he was getting better, he was averaging 14 points a game in that postseason. Jordan was averaging darn near 40. That's just the reality of it, right? Then that carries over and set the stage for what he did in the finals, where he went undefeated, never faced a Game 7, never faced a 2-1 deficit in the finals. See, when you look at his resume shows you he never let you down. Even when he suffered defeat to the Boston and Detroit, he put so much fear in the opponent to where even when they team won, they took time to respect what Michael Jordan was doing. Detroit did it, contrary to what Isaiah Thomas tried to tell the public now. Every time Detroit beat the Bulls in the playoffs, the first thing that they did, even more so than being celebratory, they said, man, that Michael Jordan something else, boy. We had to put all our focus on Jordan. Because if you made one mistake against him, you was already beat. That's what Joe Dumars used to say. That's what Shannon Sharp won't tell you. You see what I'm saying? So he never faced a 2-1 deficit in the finals. So that shows that every time his number was called and he had to rise to the occasion, he did it. In every big game in the playoffs where it was do or die, where, as they say, Game 5, a lot of times the team who wins Game 5, 85% chance they win the series. Where it becomes best 2 out of 3, Jordan stepped up every time. Pippen would get you about 17 points in those type of games. But Jordan would step up. You see what I'm saying? See, there's no match. There's no match, man. And see, the thing about it is, man, when you try to insult the athlete like this, man, it's all going to backfire in the end. But it's sad to see, because this man was voted the number 1 athlete of the 20th century by the very network who's trying to tear him down for another guy who's lost more than he has won in championship play. I've never seen nothing like it. But it's all unfortunate. But in the end, Jordan will shine, as he should, and all the other great luminaries of this sport, they will actually move up in the rankings, where the guy they trying to prop to the top, when the smoke clears, when the dust settles, he will descend like Halley's Comet. So I just want to drop that nugget. Kudos to Michael Jordan. Always much respect and appreciate for what he brought to the sport. And until next time, this is JB for BTB. Behind the Bench.